This one's going to punch me right in the journalism degree.
Well, I'm going to talk about eco-terrorism.
Got too excited about jorts.
I am leaving now with my Roomba or your blood on my hands.
I'm back on my bullshit.
What is meme if not air horn persevering?
No, this is not a family show.
And I quote, many American titties.
Why'd you have to bring Dane Cook to this, Andrew? No one wanted that.
Oh, you guys are not ready for what I've got today.
And I've apparently hit the very end of my attention span.
Give me like 30 seconds. I'm looking for rhymes. Hello and welcome to Debate This, the show where no one is right, but someone is definitely wrong. In this show, we take time out of our busy adult lives to talk about comic books, video games, and how game developer Firaxis and publisher 2K Games not only created a game featuring Matt's favorite Marvel properties, scientifically engineered for him to hate, but at the same time also strategically weaves together XCOM-style squad-based tactics for Todd, collectible card game combat for Kyle, and an in-depth Persona-like social link mechanic for me. Marvel's Midnight Suns was scientifically engineered in a lab for Debate This.
Have you already downloaded it? Are you playing it?
It's on my PlayStation.
I haven't. I've got to finish Rabbids first, and then I'm going to do it.
I do not have a means by which to play it, and that brings me great sadness.
I will likely be streaming it.
If anyone wants to give me an Xbox, I'm in the market for an Xbox.
I'll be doing a subathon for Kyle's Xbox.
Is it not on Switch?
It's not on Switch yet, at least. Yeah,
I watch Andrew play it then.
Yeah,
I was led to believe it would be on Switch, and then upon release day, I come to find I was lied to.
The day this comes out is the 13th. There is a very good chance that tomorrow I will be streaming on twitch.tv/debatethiscast. And if I'm not, sorry.
This is all just further proof that I am the younger brother black sheep of this podcast. I feel left out of these celebrations.
It's coming to Switch in 2023.
Who cares?
So
Todd?
far away.
Well,
Matt.
Speaking of things that all of us equally unilaterally enjoy, today's flavor text is absolutely dripping with nostalgia. Now, guys, picture this. It's
gooey, sticky nostalgia.
Gooey, gross nostalgia. Picture this. It is 3:28 p.m. The sun is shining, and you've just stepped off the school bus after a long day of watching the clock, anticipating 3:28 p.m. You approach the front door of your house, dreaming of the next episode of Dragon Ball Z that airs in 7 minutes on Toonami, and you look down to pick up the stack of mail that's sitting on your doorstep. Among the boring bills and lame ads, you see it. A wondrous explosion of color and crude 3D animation, accompanied by random mentions of Mario and Star Fox. That's right, boys. The monthly Nintendo Power is here.
Oh, finally.
It's Nudie Magazine Day!
Much in the same way, I can't wait to unfold the trifold full-length poster.
This is a 4th grade fantasy, not an 8th grade fantasy. You rush inside and rip open the plastic, get a good whiff of that freshly new minted ink. You look at the clock on the oven. You still have about 6 minutes until DBZ time, so you head to the bathroom to start reading up on the latest news and reviews, because you do all your reading in the bathroom.
Of course.
So yeah, we're talking about Nintendo Power today. It's going to be a good time. Before we get into it, quick special thanks to our valued editor-at-large of Buttthwomp Nation at Bacon Bit Behemoth for commissioning today's episode. Well, if you've listened to the last few DT episodes, you've likely heard that we are, in fact, changing up the process for our flavor text here in the new year. Starting in January, if you out there want to commission your own flavor text, you no longer have to join a tier at a certain level and be subscribed for 3 months. No. All you have to do...
No, it's worse than that now.
It's different. It's not better, it's different. All you have to do is hop on over to patreon.com/debatethiscast and pay a one-time payment of $60. Longtime listeners will remember this is how flavor texts used to work back when we first introduced them before we added the $25 tier. So basically, we're getting rid of the $25 tier. We're reverting back to flavor text being a one-time thing. So, real quick, just once again, patreon.com/debatethiscast. Join up at Master Debater. You will get charged once. You will get charged one time, just like before. Go process your payment and then swap out, and then you can go down to a tier, do whatever. I'm not your dad. We will then reach out to you, and we'll figure out logistics, and you'll be added to the list of commissions. Cool. All right. With that out of the way, today's flavor text is so packed with power that it can't be handled by just one measly host. So please welcome to the show the Nestor to my Howard, Kyle, cream of banana soup, Harper. In addition, we are joined by Matt, crush me, big monkey, crush me, Cole, and Todd, you're telling me that this Rumble Pack actually lets players feel the game? Thomas.
90s advertising was such a trip. It was a lawless land.
So mild spoiler for later, I won't say what. I went digging for a specific ad through Nintendo Powers today. 90s ads are buck wild.
They're so good, and we're gonna talk about it because you can't talk about Nintendo's American promotional campaigns when you're talking without talking about Nintendo Power. There are a few choice ones that will forever be embedded in my mind, and there's some real highlights. Look, I know we all have some experience with Nintendo Power here. How could you not? But I'm wondering, I have a feeling it's different. It's at different times during the run of the mag. So I'd love to go around instead of saying like, are you familiar with it? I want to hear everyone's experiences with the Nintendo Power, and were you a subscriber? Did you just buy off of the shelves? And if you were a subscriber, do you remember when? Kyle, let's start with you.
I was a subscriber. I subscribed, I think, 1999 to about 2006, maybe 2000. I subscribed for a while. I loved Nintendo Power. My first Nintendo Power thing was the Pokemon Red and Blue guide and Pokedex that they put out before I ever subscribed. And then that at some point spun into a subscription somewhere along the line, probably through my school's yearly magazine drive is when I first
you did a magazine drive for school? That's cool.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we did too, yeah.
Oh, wow. No, we never did that.
You could win Weebles, which were little craft pom-poms with feet glued.
Yeah, they wobble, but they don't fall down.
Nope, that was different. But yeah, those 5 cents of craft supplies really got our school to hustle magazines for this company.
Wow.
And I got Nintendo Power through that, and I loved every issue of it. Some of them are still in my parents' house in various states of destruction because I was a child and didn't know what collecting things meant.
Matt, what about you?
I would just like to copy and paste Kyle's answer here. I think I had almost the exact same experience. I think the guide to Pokemon Blue was maybe the first thing that I got from Nintendo Power. And then I remember having a Nintendo official gold and silver guide, and I don't know if that was Nintendo Power related or not. But
I learned today that a lot of those guides were written by Nintendo Power.
Yeah.
Oh, well, then there you go. I would say that most of my Nintendo Power memories come from the guides. I think that I was a subscriber at some point in probably a similar vein as Kyle, whether it was from a Scholastic book fair or my school did magazine drives. I think my Boy Scout troop did magazine drives. I was subscribed to a lot of magazines as a kid because I liked to pretend that I read, even though I did not.
Yeah.
So I liked looking at the pictures, but most of my memory of Nintendo Power is clinging to those guides for a lot of Game Boy games. Yeah, because if it wasn't on GameFAQs, I didn't know how to do it until I found it in a Nintendo guide. So there you go.
We're going to talk about that and GameFAQs a lot today. Todd, what about you?
Yeah, so my first introduction into Nintendo Magazine was definitely getting one of my grandparents to just buy me the magazine off of the shelf. Whenever I'd go grocery shopping with either one of my grandparents as a child, I would always just sneak a game magazine, like a PC Gamer or a Game Informer or a Nintendo magazine into a cart. And at some point, one of my parents made the fatal flaw to let me buy a subscription to Nintendo Power that I'm positive just kept like reissuing itself.
Yep.
It was on
And
autopay.
right. And I was trying to timestamp it, and I could not tell you when I started, but I think it was like 98. It would have been 97, 98, because I know one of the core defining memories. If you remember the ads for Smash Bros. 64,
Yeah.
and I remember the corresponding Nintendo Power that went with that, and Smash Bros. Came out in 99, so I'm guessing it was like 98. And every month would get that. Even went through a little bit of a Game Informer phase as well with it. I canceled my subscription around 2005. It had gotten out of control, the number of issues. If you think about it, one a month for like 7 years. A lot of magazines just like sitting around. A lot of those trifold posters that I'd be like, oh, this is great, and I'd put it on my wall. And I'm pretty sure at one point I stepped back and I was like, what has my life become? What am I doing with all these magazines? Because the spine would make an image. Every 6 to 8 issues, maybe even 10 or 12 if they did it by the year, would be like a Mario or a Pikachu or a Link or a Samus. And I just remember at a certain point in time, I didn't get rid of any of them. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I can't.
Yeah. I similarly. So my Nintendo Power phase is a little bit earlier. I like we talked about on the last flavor text. Like I had a Super Nintendo when Super Mario World came out, and I was really young when I had my Super Nintendo. So I had like mostly platformers and stuff, but I didn't really like seriously start getting into those types of games until Donkey Kong Country. So I remember I have a very vivid memory of like dragging my parents to the Galleria Mall in South Hills, Pennsylvania, right outside of Pittsburgh, and like going from like newsstand to newsstand looking for a fucking Donkey Kong Country like player's guide. And I remember the first issue of Nintendo Power I got was because it had like maps for Donkey Kong Country, which I know is like a very common, experience.
Right.
And then similarly, like I would buy issues occasionally at the grocery store. My subscription period was most of the N64 period, so I went from like 95 to 98.
Oh, wow.
And then I dipped out and I dipped back in. So like my grandparents would always like, that was a thing, was like, we want to gift you, like, pick a magazine to subscribe to, because it's like I can buy. It's like I'm buying my grandson a book, but it's not really a book. It's it's something to read, So like Matt, this is me pretending to read.
I mean, that's how I have a Marvel Unlimited subscription right now. I love my grandma very much.
Sure,
she's a nice lady.
I had my grandparents all died out by like 2001. So then I re-upped a subscription around the GameCube launch. So I had another year, maybe 2 years, that I like put up all the posters. I had the big like Metroid Prime poster in my basement, all that stuff. And then I flipped hard to Game Informer. And once Game Informer
was edgy.
Because it's edgy. Because I liked the journalism.
Right.
So I flipped pretty hard over to Game Informer. And I was a Game Informer diehard because I had a PS2, pretty much until high school, until 505 or 06.
Yeah, I flipped to Game Informer in high school, and it was literally like the rule was we will pay for one video game magazine subscription.
Yep, you swap one out for the other.
Yeah.
Cool. There was also a Sports Illustrated for Kids subscription in there. That was like the one year I didn't do Nintendo Power. I don't know what I was. I checked the wrong box, I think. I don't know. Go ahead, Matt.
No, it's fine. I mean, I had a car magazine for a while that I absolutely was never into, but I have a very strong memory of having the Nintendo Power with the Super Mario Sunshine cover. That's like, if I'm going to timestamp my memories outside of the gold and silver and the red and blue guides, it was the Super Mario Sunshine era. So that would have been like 2001.
I bring it up later. The one burned into my memory is the Melee, the Super
Yep.
Smash Bros. Melee
The
issue.
GameCube launch had some really good cover. There's some really really fantastic covers.
Yeah.
Especially in those later years, honestly. All right, let's jump into it. So the format for today is gonna be a little bit different. Kyle and I are gonna kind of go back and forth. The way that we've mapped this out is we're gonna go through kind of the timeline, the lifetime of Nintendo Power. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the history, some factoids, kind of like what was going on with Nintendo at the time, and then I'll kick it to Kyle to go over some highlights on certain issues, different covers, things like just some fun things that were going on in this period to show how the magazine was evolving and changing over time. So, to kick things off, let's talk about the birth and rise of Nintendo Power. So, anybody who knows, anything about video game history knows that Nintendo in Japan originally started as a toy manufacturer. They made Hanafura cards. They made in the 70s. They made all kinds of different kinds of interactive toys. Definitely burgeoning on electronics. And of course, they went in hard on electronics after creating Donkey Kong, which was an arcade game in 1981. That's history that everybody knows. After the massive success of Donkey Kong, they pretty much that was the stake in the ground. All right, we make electronics now. So they began development on the Famicom Disk System, which eventually released in Japan in February of 1986. This was eventually known as the Nintendo Entertainment System in America, of course. Now, whereas in Japan, arcades were, and still are, a huge success. Arcade culture is enormous in Japan. It is a thing that people do very, very regularly. It is a normal hangout spot for kids, for teens, whatever. Things in America, though, in the West were a little bit different. Arcades definitely had a boom, during Pac-Man, Galaga, the late 70s, and even in Donkey Kong, there was a little bit of a later resurgence. But in America, by 1983, video games had pretty much gone away. There were arcades were closing in droves. There were tons of just abandoned machines left and right. It is very much known as the video game crash of '83. After the video game crash, a lot of companies like Atari was losing money. They had just released the system, what was it, 2600. A lot of these companies were, coming up. This was like a dot-com burst, right? A lot of these companies had come up and been busted overnight. So,
Andrew, you're talking like Dave and Buster's is not a very successful franchise in the United
Chuck
States.
E. Cheese, right?
See also Chuck E. Cheese.
Yeah, exactly. So, arcades are definitely a thing, but nowhere, and I don't think ever rose to the popularity that they were in the 70s and they are today in Japan. So, I say this only to contextualize why Nintendo of Japan had some trepidation and why people in America had a lot of hesitation in bringing that stuff to the States. It was not considered to be a wise business move. That said, though, Nintendo of America opened shop to distribute Donkey Kong arcades in the early 80s, and this brings us to the man who single-handedly made Nintendo a thing in America. I am not talking about Mario's daddy, Shigeru Miyamoto. Rather, I am talking about Mario's adopted American exchange program daddy, the squeaky clean, bow tie-clad Howard Phillips. And as always, as we usually do, we have an imager file in the notes. You listening at home can follow along. This is image 1, so we are looking at Howard Phillips. Do any of you guys know who this guy is?
Yes.
Matt, you do?
I feel like I've heard the name, and I do not. I'm not connecting it right now.
I do, but I did research.
You did the research for this episode. Yeah, so I'll tell. So for Todd's sake, and for people listening at home, Howard Phillips was very much an early gaming icon, kind of like the lawful good Nolan Bushnell. I don't know. That joke was at least for Matt.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about when in the birthplace of comics in the 50s. We talked a lot about the comics code. Howard Phillips is definitely connected to the video game version of that. But more importantly, Howard Phillips, I think the best way to describe Howard Phillips is he's the very first localizer in gaming history. So Howard Phillips, as a teen, was a huge fan of arcades through the boom of the 70s, and he carried that passion through the early 80s. And a friend of his connected him to a warehouse job with the then newly formed Nintendo of America. And Nintendo of America at the time was just a warehouse in Tukwila, Washington. Howard Phillips was Nintendo of America's 5th employee. Just to show you how small of a scale. Like, this was literally just like a distribution operation.
Yeah.
So
they were
Howard Phillips
sending out Donkey Kong.
Yep, just shipping Donkey Kong machines.
Yep.
So Howard Phillips, his initial responsibility was just manage the warehouse. Again, a team of like 8 people. But you can imagine being part of such a small team. He and the rest of the warehouse workers were literally the only conduit between this like board of execs in Japan and the entire American audience. That was it. Like they had no line in, they had no American affiliate, or that was the American affiliate. So like they had no idea how their stuff was doing in America other than like looking at business sales figures. And Howard, being such an avid gamer already, and being a white dude, he quickly gained a reputation internally for being basically offering himself up as a consultant. Like, he was the guy that had been like, hey, this is doing really well here, this is not doing so well here, right? Like, just kind of giving a lot of that really well needed feedback to the Japanese developers. So when it was time to launch the Famicom stateside, Howard Phillips was literally on the front lines in developing the marketing strategy. A couple interviews. He's done a ton of interviews. Like, he's done an interview with every major gaming site at this point. But he talks about how like he was working, 24-hour days, 7 days a week, yada yada yada, on the launch of the Famicom, trying to figure out like how do we package this thing and sell it to an American audience. Anyone who knows who knows a lot about the history of the NES will also know that the NES did not launch with Super Mario Bros. The NES's first year, when it came out in 1987,
88, somewhere around there.
Launched with 2 pack-in games. The first was Duck Hunt and the NES Zapper, and the other was Gyroscope. Was it Gyroscope, Matt? Am I saying that right? Okay.
Yeah.
And everyone's favorite, Rob. The little
Gyromite.
Robot.
I'm so
Gyromite.
sorry. It's Gyromite.
Thank you.
Euroscope.
Euroscope. Yeah. It's good. It's very good.
Oh boy, I need an animation of a very Mediterranean Rob the robot.
It's Rob, but he shaves meat off the cyclone.
I was gonna say I want Rob just like shaving meat off of the hunch.
Off the cone.
Yeah. That's incredible.
I just want to also contribute. This is like the success story of so many like white nerds at this time of just like,
it was the Wild West. Yeah,
it was like oops, I stumbled into a successful business strategy, and I was like in Washington, so I'm one of the first 10 people on the ground, and now I'm a millionaire. Like,
exactly.
It's
I mean,
amazing.
Very, very well said. This was the time to be a white nerd in business. But and we don't need to get into the specifics in the history of the NES, but I do find it very interesting. The original marketing strategy was to not sell it as a video game console. It was a toy. The NES Zapper, the Rob, right? These were all interactive toys. And it wasn't until Super Mario Bros. Came out a year later where they were really comfortable with being like, okay, here's the controller. This is a video game. So following the NES launch, I would say Howard Phillips, one of his 2 biggest contributions to Nintendo history was through this set of standards that would define which Nintendo games, which NES games Nintendo would license and produce in the US. This would eventually be recognized as the Nintendo Seal of Approval. This is that little gold sticker mark that appears on basically any NES box. This is very much like the comics code in the 60s. This is the code that dictated that NES games would be more or less family friendly. They would be free from mass depictions of violent gore, violence and gore, sexuality, or religious themes and iconography. So this is why, for example, why crosses were removed from the original Castlevania, or why Ness wears pajamas in Magicant in Earthbound. And image 2 is that Nintendo seal of approval. Everyone has seen this before.
I thought the Nintendo seal of approval, and it's possible it's both reasons. I thought that came about because a like glut of shovelware almost killed the NES as well.
Yes to both. Yeah.
Okay.
This was all part of their like, how do we localize this and make this marketable in the US?
Gotcha.
Howard Phillips' other major contribution to Nintendo was the creation of a toll-free telephone number that kids, mostly aimed at kids at the time, could call and speak to a real live game counselor that was employed by Nintendo.
I love this so
AKA
much.
the dream job that I always wanted until age 15. That they could call to get tips or help with a certain Nintendo game. And for a long time, this was totally free.
Mm-hmm.
Did any of you guys call the helpline?
We had the internet by then, and therefore no longer needed it.
Okay.
I did I think I considered it once, and I was not allowed because my parents were afraid of toll numbers.
Yeah.
It was really expensive.
When it became a 900 number, it was not cheap.
Okay.
Todd?
I did not call the line, though always tempted to do so.
Yeah. So I did.
Well, what I was going to say is that when I went to see the Earthbound documentary at PRGE a couple years ago, they interviewed some of the guys that were part of that.
That's awesome.
And that what we could have never known back then is these were just adults,
guys.
just adults that had the game a week before you did.
Yep.
Like that's truly it.
I think one of the most remarkable things is just to understand the scale of this whole operation.
Right.
It's so much smaller than you think it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I do remember I did call the toll-free number once, and it was to learn how to get past the first level of Tiny Toons Adventures: Buster Busts Loose.
Wow.
It was my first. It was my first Super Nintendo game that my parents bought for me. I was maybe 4 years old, maybe 5. And back then, my dad was so just like amazed with the technology that we would play a lot together in the summers. And I remember like just not understanding how to beat this first level. And like he got really frustrated because like we would play like Mario World and stuff together. And he was just like, "Fuck it." And he was just like, we opened the instruction manual. He was like, "I'm calling the number." We put it on speakerphone. And the guy was like he was just super nice. And he was explaining like, "Oh, you have to do this thing." It's like, I didn't know what I was doing. I was 4 years old and I didn't read the instruction manual. So I didn't know how to play the game. It was a very nice, very wholesome experience.
I never called the tip line, but I will say in like 2017, 2018, when I bought my Super Nintendo, I was having some hardware problems with my Super Nintendo, and I flipped it over to call the toll-free or the support line number on the bottom of the Super Nintendo, which is still the Nintendo support line number, and they asked for the serial number of my Super Nintendo, and I gave it to them, and they helped me fix my problem.
Yeah.
So good things to say about
Shout out.
Nintendo phone lines.
Wow.
Nintendo customer service is great. They helped me unbrick my Wii U when I downloaded Breath of the Wild on it. Anyway, so this was great. This was another way that they were, trying to evangelize Nintendo to young kid players. So along with a woman named Gail Tilden, who was Nintendo of America's first director of marketing, Phillips and Tilden expanded this game counselor line into a free membership program called the Nintendo Fun Club. And this is a free club that you could join. Members would, as a part of the club, would receive a copy of the periodical Nintendo Fun Club News. And this is shown as image 3. So this is the first issue of Nintendo Fun Club News.
That is so quaint.
Right? It's a zine. They did a
Yeah.
zine.
Yeah, they did a zine.
Yeah.
I kind of really like this font
I love
that
it.
Fun Club News is in.
Yeah, I love it. If I was still in it would be like the perfect, just like independent, zine. It's just a perfect zine.
Guys, let's start a zine. Let's debate this into a zine.
It's the new. We should start a band. We should do a zine. So Nintendo Fun Club News, the zine, went on for 7 issues. It was like a bi-monthly thing, until it was ultimately scrapped and replaced with an official, more robust magazine named Nintendo Power. Nintendo Power placed Gail Tilden as its editor-in-chief, and her marketing team was basically its editorial staff. So when I say like the scope of these things are so much smaller, it was literally this 5-person marketing team. The entire PR team was just the editorial staff of Nintendo Power overnight. And it's great.
Yeah.
And then Howard Phillips also served on. He was the senior editor until he left Nintendo a few years later. So the first issue of Nintendo Power was released in August of 1988. This featured a classic, very iconic claymation illustration of Mario and Wart to promote Super Mario Bros. 2. This was basically the first ever reveal of Super Mario 2, which people in America would not know until years later was actually a reskinned, entirely different game. The magazine was mailed out to the 600,000 members of the Nintendo Fun Club. So you could, this became a thing fast. In an interview with Complex, was it Complex? Yeah, an interview with Complex, Gail Tilden had said that they eventually sent up to 3 million copies, all for free.
Wow.
For free.
Yep,
That's
for free.
Amazing.
It was. I mean, this was promotion. This was how you got this stuff out, and it definitely. I mean, it obviously paid off. Carrying on the tradition of the Game Counselor line, Nintendo Power in the early stages definitely leaned way harder into the tips, tricks, secrets for all of the existing Nintendo products. It was much less a catalog and much more of like, hey, your parents bought you this game and you don't know what's going on. Here's how to do it. There were these really elaborate, illustrated, full color maps, walkthroughs, and strategy, little mini strategy guides. A lot for the first couple levels of a game. There were also recurring sections like Counselor's Corner, where people would just write in questions and the quote unquote experts would answer them. Again, just a dude,
just some
guy.
people.
Some guy would answer it. And also classified information, which I know all of you probably remember. This was your secrets and cheat codes and stuff like that. Famously, the very first issue of Nintendo Power in the classified information included the very famous Konami code for Contra that grants players 30 lives.
Right on.
The thing that I always looked forward to was the art, where people would
the fan art.
The fan art. Some of the most amazing stuff would be drawn on the actual envelopes that they would mail to Nintendo Power, and it was always so cool.
It was really cool, and that was something that they kept. I mean, Kyle's going to talk about it, but that's something that they kept doing for years and years.
Yeah.
Image 4 shows just an example of the Counselor's Corner. So this is a map of the original Metroid, which, I don't know how you play this game in 1989 and not have a map. It's nigh impossible.
Yeah.
Another popular recurring bit in the early days was the comic called Howard and Nestor. The former being Howard Phillips, a cartoon version of Howard Phillips, and the latter being an original character depicted as the progenitor of a snarky 90s kid. He was just kind of like a whatever man, Image 5 is Howard and Nestor, and this ran for a number of years. Howard and Nestor was a kind of just a cutesy, funnies, Sunday Funnies-esque comic that also had a bunch of game tips in it. So there was another version of hey, I'm having it was trying to recreate the I'm talking about a game to my friends at recess, and you see here that there's it's Howard the very dorky guy is what's up young child, and the young child's whatever, level 8's hidden in the second screen, blah blah blah. He's it's very very fun. This was very popular with readers. So the first couple years sailed by pretty consistent, starting with that first issue. After the release of the Game Boy in '89, Nintendo Power would eventually add a new section dedicated to Game Boy, and this is how they did it for a while. Was there's Nintendo Power, and then there's the Game Boy section.
Yeah.
And like there is the classified information for Game Boy and the like counselor's corner for Game Boy, you know.
Very segregated.
Yes,
in that
very
way.
segregated. Yeah. So around 1990, so Nintendo Power when it launched was a bi-monthly, which means it came out every other month. And around
Or did it come out twice a month?
Every other month. Bi-monthly is every other month.
Bi-monthly is also twice a month.
It's not. That's semi-monthly.
That's flammable and inflammable.
Those are not. I have recently been instructed that those are not interchangeable terms. My wife may or may not be a writer. Anyway, around 1990, Nintendo Power went to monthly. So, and then that was the cadence ever since until its death. Around this time, 2 more recurring sections popped up called Now Playing and Pack Watch. Now Playing was, just scored reviews of new Nintendo games, and then Pack Watch was just a list of what's upcoming. So this was your this was all you got for news and previews, pretty much. And then finally, they added a kind of like a bookend section called Top 30, which was just this like Billboard style ranking of top games for that week as voted on by readers. Interestingly enough,
I couldn't figure out how they determined that while I was
I think it was
digging
just like reader feedback and like who's to say. I mean, it could have been like anyone who had an uncle in Nintendo, So, like it was like Tetris and Mario, like
yeah.
like no one's gonna argue that. And I don't know if you saw this in your research, Kyle, but I saw something and I couldn't verify it, but it said that Now Playing got a lot of like people remember Now Playing and remember the reviews as being very nice to Nintendo games. But I saw a video that said like actually like there are some games that did not get reviewed very well. Famously, what was it? The Three Stooges was one of the most highest reviewed games in the NES era, beating the likes of like Super Mario Brothers 2.
What?
I peeked at some scores while I was looking, and the one that shocked me was the Superman 64, notorious for being a broken game
Right.
from Nintendo in that time, got a 4.5 still.
Like that's so funny. Which was the same score that Super Mario World got. Super Mario World got like a 4.2.
Wow.
Good lord.
It's very funny. So Howard Phillips left Nintendo in 1991, while Gail Tilden would go on to serve as editor-in-chief for the first 10 years of the publication's history, until she eventually left to go work on PR for Pokemon. The July 1991 issue of Nintendo Power then changes the Howard and Nestor comic to just Nestor's Adventures.
Yeah.
And that's the history of the first era. Kyle, why don't you talk about some of the notable issues and highlights?
Yeah, so I've got a picture here in our picture document of the first ever cover of Nintendo Power. Just very notable for being the first ever and having the word free sample copy on the cover. It's like Andrew said, a very colorful clay sculpture of Mario and Wart from Super Mario World 2. And it's got, this issue was, I dug through it. It's got 18 pages on like tips and tricks for Super Mario 2. It's got the entire, it like breaks down the entire second quest of Legend of Zelda, the first Legend of Zelda. And it's just, like you said, has all those things that we talked about.
Mario's colors are wrong.
And Mario's colors are wrong.
Yeah.
Well, they were wrong in the game, because I went and checked. They matched the game, and Mario's colors were wrong because it was not a Mario game.
Because it wasn't a Mario game.
We can't stress that enough. This was not originally a Mario game, but was turned into one to sell to us dumb Americans. It's very, very artistic and very cool. Like, it was a very cool issue to look through. I do recommend, if you have the time, search around on archive.com. I was able to find scannings of like every issue up through 2004 collected. And then they had the rest, like you can definitely find the rest of them on there as well, but they weren't all collected in one easy to find spot, like the first decade and a half, 20 years, first 20 years of Nintendo Powers. So yeah, that's the first issue. It's very cool. And then I included the second issue because this
is so cool. I love this.
Yeah.
The vibes changed.
The vibes,
They
the
sure did.
vibes have changed. The word of the week at Debate This is vibes, apparently. But this is for this. The cover is for Castlevania 2: Simon's Quest, and this cover is notable because it has someone depict a person in a costume depicting. Is it Simon Belfort? Is that
Belmont.
Belmont?
Simon Belfort made a lot of money illegally.
But he is holding the decapitated head of Dracula, and there is a skull sitting on top of a cow's heart, and like mist
pretty metal.
and blood. It's so metal.
It's 14 pages of gory details, Kyle.
It's 14 pages of gory details, and I just wanted to include that to be like, look, it was the 90s, and there were no rules.
1988. It was even less rules.
Right.
It was 1988. There were even less rules.
It just like it is so funny that this is the second issue.
Yes, yeah, and that's what I wanted to drive home is like issue 1, clay sculpture of Mario. Right. Issue 2, man holding Dracula's decapitated head next to a skull. Just so rad. The other cool things that were Nintendo Power put out during this period, the most important one after the the first issue is the Super Mario Brothers 3 strategy guide. This is not Nintendo Power's first full strategy guide. They did release a few as special issues prior to this. However, this was the first one they did for a popular game. They did a lot of like sports and racing games that, had middling attraction, but like Super Mario Brothers 3 was the game. If you had a Nintendo, you had this game. It was the 90s on a cartridge. And no strategy guide before this point was as in-depth and thorough and well written as this one. This really set the standard, not just for like Nintendo Power guides, but all strategy guides were so good because this one was so good first. It included like a full power-up index, every secret pathway, and in every level, strategies for overcoming every puzzle and platform challenges, as well as like Easter eggs hidden in the game, boss fight strategies. Just it was 85 pages of just in-depth coverage for, again, the most popular game at the time. I would not have torn my Pokemon strategy guide to shreds reading it over and over and over again had this not existed. Yeah. So that's why I wanted to include that. And then the other one towards the end of the NES era is the Battletoads issue, is a very popular one. This is notable for including Nintendo Power's first full-length strategy guide, like included in the magazine you got mailed to you as a subscription. So like the Super Mario Brothers strategy guide and all the other strategy guides before were like special releases. You could order them through Nintendo Power, but they didn't come as part of your subscription. This, just like the first half of this issue of Nintendo Power, was all Battletoads strategy guide. Start to like roll credits.
Wow.
Yeah.
40 pages of this issue were dedicated to a full run of Battletoads.
Holy smokes.
That's ridiculous. I also love the idea of like, because I remember when I'd be like looking at those maps where you'd have it right in front of you, you'd be sitting crisscross applesauce on the floor, you'd have it like laid out on your lap, right? And you're looking up at the screen, then you pause and you look down. You look up at the screen.
Yep.
But I love the idea of like somebody with like a 4-page fold out of the jet bike level, and like every 25 seconds, just like pausing and like, okay, what's next? Yeah, cool. So yeah, that's the 80s, the early years. So let's now transition into the Super Nintendo and the N64 era. So the September of 1991 issue of Nintendo Power featured Super Mario World on its cover. ushering in the new era of the Super Nintendo, which launched in America in August 1991. This issue included a whopping 16 pages dedicated to Super Mario World, which was very much becoming the thing. One game would be the feature, and it was like, again, basically, like Kyle said, like basically a mini strategy guide. Image 9 here in the dock, or I'm sorry, image 8, excuse me. This is the full color spread of the Mario World map. I think this is really fun. I love this map.
Yeah.
This brings a lot of feelings back.
Yeah.
But like, again, like imagine just like seeing that. Like nobody saw a world map before. Like nobody saw anything like this. Like your just minds are getting blown left and right. Now the magazine by this point still looks very much like it did from the beginning. It's very focused on walkthroughs and tips and tricks. But now with the Super Nintendo, we've got to focus on highlighting new and upcoming games, right? More and more games are coming out. The Game Boy has games coming out. NES still has games coming out. So we've got this situation now where the Nintendo Power magazine is effectively split into 3 sections. And those 3 sections by 1992-ish are Nintendo, NES, Super Nintendo, Game Boy. And a lot of the reason for that is, you know, this was before console wars were a thing. This was before consoles upgrade. It wasn't very well known that you would have to upgrade a console. Even though this was called the Super Nintendo, you know, a lot of people couldn't afford getting a Super Nintendo. Like, well, I already have a Nintendo. So
these were the the Super Nintendo at the time, I think, was like the equivalent of $500-600 in
like
$1991.
PS5.
Yeah, it was like a PS5, except it looked like Super Nintendo. Like,
yeah, exactly. And the games were, you know, there was no like general price. So a lot of those Super Nintendo games, especially the earlier ones, were like $80 in 1991. You know, like I remember Yoshi's Safari, for example, with the Super Scope being 100 bones in 1992.
Wow, boy,
or 93, whenever launched. So yeah, I mean that was just the landscape. You know, Earthbound launched at like $80 retail price. So because of all that, NES games were still getting made. Right, NES games were getting made. Mega Man 6 came out in like 1992 or 93. Yoshi was made for both the NES and the Super Nintendo. Right, they were still supporting the NES a couple years after the Super Nintendo's launch. Because of that, Nintendo Power therefore had to support NES. So you would have these 3 sections, and just like with Game Boy, everything had its own kind of thing. So the magazine was effectively like 3 smaller magazines, which is, you know, very weird, but whatever. And another thing that came out of this era were trying to build these franchises, right? We had Super Mario World, we had Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past. You know, these were now the 3rd and 4th installments of these very now well-known franchises. So I think one of the things Nintendo was trying to do was build up these identities, build up these characters. So what you saw in the early 90s were these serial comics on some of these franchises. The image that I've got in here is of the Legend of Zelda Link to the Past comic. This is the last issue of a 12-series serial. So the entirety of 1992, a significant portion of Nintendo Power was reserved for this like really cool comic based on A Link to the Past.
Yeah.
There was also one. Yeah, really cool, right? There was also one for Mario as well, and then later, a couple years later, they did one for Star Fox, and they did a couple other ones.
I'll talk. I had it later, but I'll talk about it now. The Link to the Past one was very dramatic adventure comic, like very serious.
Yeah, it's really
good.
And
it's very good. And then the Mario one was more silly. Was like very like full of jokes. Like, you know, it was the antics of Bowser kidnapping Peach.
Was the Super Show out? Was the TV show out by this point?
Oh,
feels like that may have coincided, or at least been
close. Likely.
It for the first episode ran in '89 and ran through '91.
Okay. So it was definitely out by
then.
Yeah. So
but
cool
there's a very in the first issue there's a very tongue-in-cheek joke of like they mention it's a Piperama, which is like a reference to that Super Mario Bros. 3. The whole game takes place in a like on a stage in a diorama, and they make references to the things fans talked about. They were very plugged into what the fans liked, and it was very cool.
I love that. Yeah, so we move on. Around 1993, Nintendo Power created the Super Power Club, which was the next iteration of the Nintendo Fun Club. This was offered immediately to any Nintendo Power subscribers, and it was just like, another Club Nintendo kind of thing, offering extra promotional goods. They could get like coupons off of games or trading cards. There was a series of trading cards. And this first introduced the idea of subscriber versions of Nintendo Power. And this is something that Nintendo Power would do on and off through the rest of its life. This early like Super Power Club version, what that would be was subscriber versions would come out like once quarterly. That would be like an extra little booklet inside, and it might be like a holiday guide, or one of them was like there was just like a whole ass magazine on like Mega Man or one of the or Super Metroid or something like that, right? So just extra content, extra things that like, hey, we get your money once a year, like here's some extra goodies.
Yeah.
In October of 1990, God, I'm so excited for this. In October of 1994, Nintendo's Power subscribers, myself included, were gifted with one of the greatest and weirdest promotional stunts in Nintendo's history. Any kid who had their address on file with Nintendo of America's marketing department, mostly by way of Toys R Us, woke up to find this absolute banger in their mailbox and/or doorstep, and this is shown on image 10.
I can't imagine the money that was spent for this
incredible,
the time and money that was spent for this very weird thing.
So what I am talking about is there was a VHS promotional video that was sent out to hype up Donkey Kong Country. The VHS was called Donkey Kong Country Exposed, and it is just this like batshit crazy 10-minute long VHS tape that is just it. I mean, it is one massive commercial. It is made to look like a behind the scenes documentary, but it's like the editing choices and the host are so incredibly ridiculously 90s. This is an absolute time capsule. It's great. I'm linked it in the show notes. Take a look. If you were born in the late 80s and you had a Super Nintendo around the time that I did, you probably had this tape or had a friend who had this tape. I don't know how I got this tape. I didn't subscribe to Nintendo Power at the time. It must have been like on a mailing list from Toys R Us or something. And that's unilaterally what I've seen like in the comments of all these YouTube clips. So like, I don't know how I had this, but I did. It was great, But it was really cool, and it was the first of this series of these like just crazy like to the max hype videos hyping up Nintendo's biggest release of that year. Mario never got one of these tapes. It was always the like second tier games, the ones that like we need to really hype this because like they don't need to do it for Zelda. They don't need to do it for Mario. Mario
and Zelda didn't need help.
They don't need the help.
Right.
But I truly like this. I don't know if Donkey Kong would have been nearly as successful as it was without this VHS. I think this promotional tape, while insane and probably very expensive, was massively successful. Such a good idea. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, and I'll talk about a few of the other promotional tapes. My personal favorite, so a lot of these, while the Donkey Kong Country was the one that started it, a lot of these tapes were in the Nintendo 64 era. And again, because Nintendo 64 had one new game every 6 months, they could do that. The most famous one, and my personal favorite, being the Star Fox 64 promotional tape. Which, if you watch the Donkey Kong Country one and think that's buck wild, the Star Fox 64 one is...
insane.
It's insane. It's absolutely insane. It
wild.
It is shot as though it is like an episode of MacGyver. These two bumbling idiots kidnap a fighter pilot, and the two bumbling idiots are supposed to represent Sony and Sega, and the fighter pilot, the cool heroic fighter pilot, represents Nintendo, and they all work for the different game companies, but they're also criminals and fighter pilots. It's fine, and they're like interrogating this guy, and they're like they're torturing this fighter pilot Nintendo developer, but like they're doing so by putting rubber doll of Mario in a what is like a clamp,
a vice
clamp,
a vice grip.
Yeah, he's like, "Don't do it to Mario, no!" And he's like, "Star," and then it cue like super hype footage, like Star Fox 64 is the next great adventure, blah, 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 And then they take it another level and they include this like weird scientist character who introduces the Rumble Pack, but like the two guys that are interrogating these men are like the two guys from Home Alone. Like the one guy has this like shitty Brooklyn accent, and that's where they're like, "You're telling me this here Rumble Pack makes it feel like it's so good." And the other guy like is trying to hide his Canadian accent because neither of them are obviously actors at all.
They're going to finish this gig, and then they're going to immediately go kidnap 99 other Dalmatians. Is what these guys are doing.
I did not see this until today. That like Mario in a vice grip, like
Funny.
It's been referenced so many times in other things, and I thought it was just like like a joke about enhanced interrogation. But it is weirdly a reference to this Star Fox 64 10-minute commercial that got mailed to Midwesterners' homes. I
cannot tell you how many times I watched these two VHSs. I can't tell you. I knew there was a time in my life where I knew both of these like the back of my fucking hands. So there were some other VHS promotional tapes in the N64 era. Other ones that none of these had the meteoric rise that these two did, but they did one for Diddy Kong Racing that was like a weird like Daily Show news roundup thing. They did a Banjo-Kazooie one, which was a lot more like straight. They did a Majora's Mask one, although I don't remember ever getting that one. And then they did two kind of just like sizzle reel ones. So at the time, right, like PlayStation had come out, PlayStation would do the jam packs where you'd have all the demos, like you could get pay $5 and get a demo disc. Mm-hmm. And N64 never did that because they used expensive cartridges. So this was like their kind of version of that. So there was a couple just like, again, played straight, just like sizzle reels. Of like, here's some footage of some games coming out. So, yeah, really cool. Again, that was, this is how you promoted stuff in the mid-90s. So, talking about the N64. September 1996 marked the dawn of 3D gaming, at least for Nintendo, and with it, Super Mario 64 graced the cover image in the September issue. So by 1997, Nintendo Power was now juggling the Game Boy Pocket, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, and Virtual Boy, because Virtual Boy, may I remind you, was still a thing, and they were selling that bad boy hard. I had the Virtual Boy like release issue that was just all about Virtual Boy, and I wanted that thing so bad. So the way that they'd been breaking out things by console just wasn't possible anymore, not sustainable. January 1997, Todd mentioned, or maybe Kyle mentioned, the spine art. So January 1997 was the first issue that utilized the art on the spine, which made this thing like increased its collectability for years to come.
Yeah, so I definitely joined around then because I either joined partway through a character being put in the art or right before it happened.
Yeah, me too. So then by the late 90s, maps and strategy guys were definitely still a focus. You had your walkthroughs, you had your early game maps, things like that. But then those SNES era comics like the Link to the Past stuff, that began to go away. They didn't keep that through post like Star Fox. That would give way to more feature-y type content. So now we see the magazine go from strategy guide to more of an actual legitimate magazine. And this is where we start getting behind-the-scenes previews, interviews. There was a whole thing about the Nintendo 64's launch in Japan. There would eventually be, videos, or not videos, but like pictures and images and reports from Space World. If you remember things like the Super Mario 128 thing from 19 or 2000, right? Like the pictures of Legend of Zelda, the like after Ocarina of Time, the gritty Legend of Zelda that would eventually become Wind Waker, right? That was the type of content that we started to see in Nintendo Power. Also like images of games that never came out, a full color thing on Zelda 64 that ended up being Ocarina of Time, games that would never see the light of day, Earthbound 3, you know what I mean? Like stuff like that. Like this is the point at which Nintendo Power started to swing in that direction. In September of 1997, Nintendo Power published its 100th issue, which included this massive feature listing the top 100 games of all time. Coincidentally, all of them were Nintendo.
Shocking.
Shocking. Super Mario 64, A Link to the Past, and Tetris were numbers 1, 2, and 3, respectively. And then finally, in 1998, Gail Tilden was replaced as editor-in-chief by Leslie Swan, who actually had worked there several years in localization, because localization and marketing at the time were just hand in hand. Interestingly enough, Leslie Swan also provided the voice for Princess Peach for several years, starting with Super Mario 64. So she's the one who baked you a cake.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, it's cool, right? Kyle, what do you got? Let's talk about some issues.
Yeah, so notable issues from this era. We've got the Super Mario World issue, September 1991. This was the first SNES game covered, not previewed, but covered by Nintendo Power, kicking off the SNES era of the magazine. It also featured a celebrity interview from a character from at the time, up-and-coming show, Bart Simpson.
Incredible.
A fictionalized celebrity interview with Bart
interview.
Simpson.
And just like somebody just wrote that. It's not like they had a writer from The Simpsons. They were just like, they just wrote this.
One of the questions that stood out was Bart, we see on your show that you are a big fan of video games. What do you think we could do to make video games better for you? And it was just like, I think video games should be louder and more obnoxious. Like it was just like very 1991 Bart Simpson. Just real funny stuff. The next one I have here is the Super Castlevania 4 issue, January 1992. This issue brought in a new year, and they changed up a whole lot of the layout stuff Andrew was talking about for this issue. This is the first one with the spine art, I guess, and all of that. But it introduced the serialized comics, the Link's Awakening comic, and the Super Mario comic. Nintendo would do these long serialized stories broken up over many issues on and off throughout its run. They did a Pokemon one for a while that was just like a retelling of the anime. They tried a novel. They tried to put a chapter by chapter novel in the issues at one point. It was not very good.
Children famously into novels.
Yeah.
Famously into novels, yes.
That's really funny.
But this kicked all of that off, and again, kicked off the spine art, the merging of all of the different game consoles into just one magazine. All kicked off January 1992. The next one I have, we skip ahead a few years to October 1995. This is the Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island issue. And this one is interesting and fun because it started one of the longest reply threads in the magazine's run. Started by reader Sarah Labrie. She wrote in complaining of the portrayal of women in video games at the time in 1995.
Wow.
Sarah and other readers would debate back and forth, just like in the letters to the editor page, a month and a letter at a time for years after this. And it was all started with this letter. I'm going to read it. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm sick of video games always showing girls in dresses with big pink bows in their hair. I mean, come on. In real life, we are far from being the delicate, prissy, male-dependent bimbos that the big companies seem to think we are. We don't need a male to save us every 5 minutes. We don't scream at every spider that passes by us. And most of us prefer not to waltz around in little string bikinis. And as far as video games go, the girls in my 6th grade class can take any challenge the boys can dish out. Our game of choice isn't Barbie either. Earthworm Jim, Donkey Kong Country, Killer Instinct, and Star Fox are among our favorites. Sarah Labrie, Eagan, Minnesota. 1995. first ever like girls in video games debate started, and it was in the pages of Nintendo Power. And it was very cool. I flipped through some future issues, and there were people replying like, Sarah, you forgot about like Samus Aran as a girl, and Zelda like does some stuff sometimes, and then other people come in and it's like, yeah, Sarah, like keep speaking up for us. Good job. Just very, very cool stuff.
We I think Todd mentioned the fan art, but this image also has a little bit of a clip of some fan art
Yes.
too, which I kind of forgot how like really intricate and like just cool this fan art was. It was really good.
And if you look,
Very good.
well, and if you look, this one was definitely on a letter because it's the address to Nintendo Power is there in the corner. Like someone wrote whatever they were going to write and then addressed this letter and did art on it.
Yeah. Next issue I wanted to bring up is the 1996 Happy New Year, NU, spelled NU year, issue. This was a big feature on the yet to be released Nintendo 64, at the time going by the codename Nintendo Ultra 64. This is the first issue that had screenshots of Super Mario 64, giving players their first real look at like actual 3D gameplay shots. It also had renderings from the then titled Legend of Zelda 64 and a demo called Kirby Bowl 64, which was like a bowling game featuring Kirby.
Oh, neat.
One of the, interestingly enough, on a similar note, one of the sizzle reel VHS tapes had footage for Kirby's Air Ride for the N64.
Wow.
Because I guess that was supposed to be a late stage N64 game, and it got rebuilt into a GameCube game.
Wow, I
see
cannot imagine playing Kirby's Air Ride on N64.
Right?
That sounds miserable.
Some other things, they really hyped up the full 360 analog joystick on the N64 controllers and really loved showing the controller, which was like finished by that time. So it was a very cool write-up on the N64. The other one, and this is over the span of a few issues, we talked about in our Pokemania flavor text how Red and Blue were not immediate successes and needed time to build a fan base for this game on the Game Boy, which was like at the end of its life cycle at this point. And Nintendo Power was really big in helping generate that buzz in North America and the West. It just did a like feature on how popular the game was in Japan in its July 1997 issue, with like the page after its big E3 coverage article. So it was like, when this is done, here's Pokemon, and it just talked about how like people were collecting these monsters and battling teams, and like featured these screenshots that weren't even translated into English yet, generating hype for this game, making a market so it could come over. Then they followed it up in May of 1998 with a feature, did a whole write-up on like Pokemon is coming to the US, here's what it means, here's the characters, here's what Pokemon are, like blah blah blah. And then they did a 6-issue insert from October 1998 to January 1999. It was like a mini magazine within the magazine you could rip out, and if you collected all 6 of those issues together, you had what was essentially the full Red and Blue guide that would later become the official Nintendo Power guide. It was the full walkthrough minus the Pokedex that was in the guide. And then the last one from this era, this is towards the end of the SNES cycle.
Sorry, Kyle. This is a core memory. This is a
Right.
core memory unlocked.
Weirdly enough, I think this is the first issue I had of Nintendo Power. I'm pretty, like, I was looking through, I remember the Donkey Kong 64 issue was my first, is one, and that's the first one I remember. In November 1999, the first ad for Songbird Ocarinas appeared in Nintendo Power. Songbird Ocarinas would become Nintendo Power's longest running ad purchaser, and purchased monthly ads in Nintendo Power from November of 1999 in its first appearance through its final issue in December of 2012.
I'll throw another one very similar to this. I'm going to throw it in our notes.
Okay.
If you just follow their link in the notes, it's to a Twitter or a tweet of one of the giveaways that they had done in the year 2000 of the Majora's Mask fishbone guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The ocarina is
Wow.
definitely a core memory because it ran for so long, but I remember this giveaway in the year 2000 thinking, well, I'm going to win this guitar. And
Yeah.
and this is going to change my life in such a way that I will become the best guitar player ever. Thank you to this contest that I most certainly will win.
Yeah.
Dude, I have to say, like, if you're Songbird Ocarina, do you need to spend your marketing money anywhere else?
No.
Like, can this
No.
one print page in Nintendo Power do everything? Because, like, I had a lot of friends who purchased this very ocarina.
I wanted
from
this
very
ocarina so
advertisement.
bad. And they sold, and they did well enough. They started selling other models. They started selling, like, this one is ceramic. They made a cheaper plastic. They made a, like, small version, a pocket ocarina. Like, they had all kinds of stuff by the time.
Ocarina.
Yeah. I will point out that you had to order it. You can order it by internet, phone, or fax. And it was a professional instrument for only $36.50, which is very fun.
That's still like $250 today.
I did notice something really interesting. This goes back a little bit, but when we watched that Star Fox VHS video, I noticed that at the end, they just say, like, visit us online at starfox.com or something like that. And that was, what year did that come out? Was that 96 or 98?
97.
All right. Well, in the middle of the two things I said. But Maddie and I are watching Big Brother 2000 on Paramount Plus right now. And, at least 3 times an episode they talk about their online presence. But this was the year 2000, and that means that they had to explain the internet every time. So every time they're like, America Online is our internet partner. You visit us online at or visit us on the World Wide Web at www.bigbrother.com or AOL keyword Big Brother.
AOL keyword.
And I just thought it was so wildly interesting that, like, this Star Fox ad from 3 years before Big Brother was like, you kids know how the internet works, just to, like, really prove that their target market was the early adopter of all of this technology.
My thought during the whole VHS thing was they were very smart. 1997, it was not guaranteed that everyone necessarily had a VHS player. But people who played video games likely did. And it was like, oh, they understand their target market. Very cool.
Yeah. I assume when the Toys R Us Men in Black came to record my address that they also had written down that I had a VHS. But anyway, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the 2000s and the decline of print journalism. Stay tuned.
And now, a Spooktacular Express spooky review read. This review titled, Unquestions with Wild Answers. If you've ever wanted to ponder strange scenarios about video games and comic books, then boy howdy is this podcast for you. Even after 4 years of listening, I continue to be excited about the content that is debated on this show and the wild takes presented here as answers. Plus, their flavor text series puts in the work for a deep dive on a topic, so you don't have to. This has been a Spooktacular Express spooky review read.
Okay, so let's talk about the aughts, the early aughts. So by the time GameCube launched in late 2001, everyone will remember, anyone who played video games at the time will remember, Nintendo was in a very weird spot. I don't think anyone could argue that the Nintendo 64 wasn't a commercial success, but its insistence on expensive cartridges versus CDs, the wide berth between releases, and the almost non-existent third-party support gave rise to some stiff competition in the form of Sony in 1995, and then Microsoft later at the turn of the millennium. Gamers, like a lot of us, were growing up and demanding the more mature and cinematic experiences that the PS2 and Xbox could offer. This was just the sea change of the industry. Gaming was becoming more expensive, more cinematic, more everything. And along with that change, Nintendo Power also saw its increased competition. By 2000, we mentioned GameFAQs. People could just easily, most people had evolved past AOL keywords and could just go on the internet and find tips and tricks online for free. And they could get the ASCII art along with it in GameFAQs. There became a point where you would no longer need to shell out $15 for this like elaborate printed player's guide. They were nice to have, but this was a Christmas thing at best, right? Or like, hey, I really like this game, I'll get the player's guide. Furthermore, we start to see more and more independent magazines. In the 90s, we didn't really talk about what else was there, but it was really just like GamePro, which GamePro is fun, but it was like the Fox of video game mags. Like, it was a joke, right? Like, fun factor. But GamePro is there. But then we start to see other like more like serious, reputable magazines like Electronic Gaming Monthly, Game Informer. Game Informer got bought by GameStop and became like the thing. If you subscribed to if you had a membership with GameStop, you just got Game Informer, right?
Yeah.
We also saw these like other official official Xbox magazine, PlayStation official magazine, PC Gamer. PC Gamer still exists today. Today online. Yeah. So like all these things start coming out. So now Nintendo Power has some very, very real competition. And furthermore, then we start to see online news sites. IGN starts in late 90s. Early 2000s. OneUp.com. We saw there's a whole ass cable news network called G4 TV that pops up. That's doing reviews and all kinds. So very, very quickly, we are just inundated with gaming content from all sides.
Yeah. Not to mention that the rise of YouTube happened right around the same time as all of this.
Yeah, I mean, 5 years after the GameCube's launch, we see YouTube, right? So it's just a different world. Around the turn of the millennium, Scott Pellin took over as editor-in-chief of Nintendo Power and also led a few pretty dramatic redesigns throughout the early aughts. The first is one that Kyle mentioned right at the top of the episode. Issue 150, which I think you're going to talk about 151. This accompanied the GameCube's launch at the end of 2001 in November. This would remove a lot of the, let's call it, busy artwork and a lot of the the Cosmopolitan style like headline, and like everything's in different fonts and like it all written askew, right? It got rid of a lot of that stuff and adopted a much more like simple minimalist approach.
2000s modernism right there, baby.
2000s modernism.
Oh, yeah.
Baby. That's
Man,
right. That's right.
Listen, as a frequent viewer of HGTV, I can talk a lot about the style changes.
So
that era.
And then on the note of style changes, there was yet another style change in 2005 that would late 2000s or early 2000s modernize the Nintendo Power logo as well. So we had two kind of major redesigns in the mid 2000s. By this time, the published content had also started to shift away from that strategy guide format, right? Again, like no longer is Nintendo Power the source for tips and tricks. We now start to see the like fully fledged marketing and PR arm of Nintendo of America, the Nintendo Power that people remember Nintendo Power being. early aughts issues would see more interviews with developers and other industry figures. We start to see like interviews with profiles of Miyamoto. We would see like, an interview with Koji Kondo, who wrote the Mario music, right? It's starting to kind of put names to the faces, starting to it would also feature people like in Rare, right? Like, Rare is huge in the N64 days. So like featuring like Chris Stamper from Rare and some of those guys as well, because these were all Nintendo employees. And it also, I wanted to note, and Kyle, this might be this, you might remember this too. The sponsored programmer like training academy called DigiPen.
Yeah.
Which
yeah.
Filed in the things that Andrew wanted to be when he grew up. As 1, game counselor; 2, DigiPen person. The school that I never was allowed to. My parents never shelled out the money for. Is go to DigiPen. But that was all over. I 5 or 6 episodes or issues I looked at around this time. Digipen. So some of the older staples like Counselor's Corner, classified information, these start getting axed around the GameCube era, due in part again to online forums like GameFAQs, but also due to the fact that like by 2001, most games didn't have cheat codes anymore. Like this just wasn't a thing.
This was the era of the Game Shark. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, the decline of the Game Shark, even.
Yeah.
This is the era that I think of as aesthetic cheat codes, right? Like your big head modes, your paintball modes, your things like that being the quote-unquote cheats of video games.
Yeah.
Cheats
no more 30 live codes.
Yeah, and when I say cheat codes, they weren't codes anymore, right? There wasn't it wasn't like button presses that you put on the menu. It's just unlockables. Like I think of GTA 3 is one of the last of this generation to have cheat codes, and those were just like things that you could unlock at the end of the game to make you keep playing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there just wasn't really a need for that stuff anymore. The magazine also, and so Matt mentioned this before the break, this is where we start to see the like visit us online, ask your parents' permission, right? Like it's those kinds of things. So we start to see more and more video game websites. Nintendo Power is also putting stuff online themselves, and we start seeing a lot more of that. Kyle, what issues do we want to talk about in this area?
So I will make Andrew throw a copy of the issue 150, the Luigi's Mansion cover, just because it is like very emblematic of this change. This is one I definitely have in my parents' house.
Yeah, same.
Yep.
It's I would put it up there. It's an iconic, very iconic
really
Nintendo
good.
Power cover. Announcing the launch of the GameCube. This issue and the next one I'll talk about just very much solidified. Like I will kill a family member to get a GameCube. Like that was my mentality in 2001. And I didn't have to kill a family member to do it, but I did eventually get a GameCube, and it was very, very formative for me. The one I originally wanted to talk about is the following one, 151, December 2001 issue, the Super Smash Bros. Melee cover. This is not my first issue. This was not my first issue of Nintendo Power. I think I said that is the November 1999 one. But everything building up to the release of Super Smash Bros. Melee is like stuff I will remember forever. And this issue is one of them. It had details on the opening 14 fighters you started with, and I like had those stats and like moves memorized from reading it so
that was
much.
Taped up on your bedroom wall.
It talked about like classic mode and adventure mode in there and stuff too. It also had preview guides for Pikmin and Crazy Taxi. Pikmin, which wouldn't be released for another few months, and Crazy Taxi was one of its like just normal guides, but Crazy Taxi was also a launch or early title release for the GameCube. It was very cool. The next one I have is the November 2002 issue, the Metroid Prime cover. I wanted to include this just because like it is an amazing write-up on Metroid Prime. It's a very good like in-depth start and like transition of the series from 2D to 3D after many games had already made their 3D transition. And the cover, it just looks so cool.
One thing that I noticed while you pull that up, Kyle, and I noticed this at this point that we start to see like Nintendo Power starts to utilize promotional art versus like everything before, even the N64 era. All of the covers, they were really nice, but they were all like original art, and they all looked very different from the games, right? And because Nintendo Power was essentially a Nintendo catalog, it made sense. And as it started to become like a Nintendo catalog, it just made sense with the brand to use the actual promo art. Also, the games got a lot prettier, so it was, that was an easy switch to make.
Yes. Highlight your new cool art. The cover is great. I'm also thinking of the pullout. The pullout poster was the really cool image from this one. But the other reason I wanted to include it, because this was one I kind of leafed through online as well. I found the start of one of the longest running arguments that I remember being present for the beginning of. This issue revealed the first screenshots of Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, the following issue, Letters to the Editor section, kicked off the Wind Waker is too cartoony debate.
Love it.
That plagues us to this day still.
That's awesome.
The original Gamergate, if you will.
The original
Gamergate. If the Yoshi's Island one wasn't the original Gamergate.
Yes.
Oh, fair.
But I have very clear memories of like seeing those first images and being like, "Oh, cool! Like new Legend of Zelda, how great!" And then seeing the like hate emails come in about how they would be skipping it because it's so cartoony. I also wanted to include a picture of Alan the slime. During this era, I couldn't find exactly when, but Alan Averill became one of the editors of the magazine. And rather than submit a picture, he claimed he was very camera shy. He opted to be represented by a slime plush from the game Dragon Quest. And this blue slime plush would go on to be a long-running like visual gag and mascot for Nintendo Power after this, like in the back half of it. And it all started like during the same time, while I was reading the magazine, and it was very cool. I couldn't find the first one, but I definitely remember the first. Like, I'm Alan. I don't want to share my picture. Like,
am I remembering correctly? Didn't he like wear glasses sometimes too?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, like when he would answer his more serious letters or something, the slime, they'd put glasses on the slime.
Funny. Yeah,
yeah.
I never knew what that was. Like, I just was like, okay, because like, who knew what Dragon Quest was that like wasn't super into RPGs by that point? Which
I still don't know what Dragon Quest is. So
exactly,
Alan Averill would go on to be a big localizer for Nintendo as well after he left Nintendo. That was something I found trying to find when he started and when this gag began, and I couldn't find it. Cool. Because I spent too much time looking for that Songbird Ocarina.
Well, you put all your work in the right places, Kyle. Cool. All right, let's talk about the last era, the decline and the eventual death of Nintendo Power. All of this coincides with Nintendo's...
Todd, put in some sad music here.
Right.
Some sad license-free music.
Yeah, let's get the Incredible Hulk closing credits. This would also coincide with Nintendo's dark period. And much like everything with Nintendo, signaling the death of something with the Year of Luigi. So by the late aughts, gaming content, as we all now remember in the cultural zeitgeist, had gone almost exclusively digital. We've got not only all of the online publications are rolling, we've got the onset of social media like Twitter. This would effectively cement online journalism as pretty much the de facto. And I mean, that's where we are today, right? Like, I get my news from Twitter, right? That's kind of where we're
At
Yeah.
time of recording, you get your news from Twitter.
Well, that's fair. Yeah. And this would, jam the last nail in the proverbial coffin that was print journalism and magazines. Ugh. Now, again, like we all remember this being a fairly slow decline. Magazines, you can still find magazines at grocery stores, obviously today, and they're not going anywhere. But like, they're not making a lot of money from magazines right now, and
They're a pale imitation of what.
unfortunately,
they
they're
were.
mostly ads. And this is where we start to see magazines are on the decline. They're operating by these like skeleton crews. A couple companies are making every single magazine, and so in September of 2007, we've got another casualty. About 1 year into the Wii's release, Nintendo of America announced that Nintendo Power had been sold to a company called Future US, which was a subsidiary of Future, a British, like, mega huge media conglomerate. Future would continue to publish Nintendo Power on behalf of Nintendo, but it was owned by Future US. Future US, again, the US affiliate of this British company, headquartered in San Francisco. Before taking over Nintendo Power, like I said, like they have made a bunch of magazines. They had published official Xbox magazine and were simultaneously publishing PlayStation, the official magazine. So you've got effectively one company doing all of the
Everything.
print press.
It's a real
for all of
Infinity
the-
Gauntlet kind of situation, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much. Now again, like these aren't journalism. These aren't like independent. This is not like owning IGN and at One Up, right? These are all promotional. These are ads. These are advertising. So it's no different than being a PR company and doing PR for one company and its competitor, right? Like that's what these are. These are promotional marketing efforts.
Yeah.
So by this point, in 2007, Scott Pelland resigned, who had been the editor-in-chief at the time, and he was replaced by a man named Chris Slate, who took over on Future's first issue in December of 2007. This is issue 222. And Chris Slate would continue on as editor-in-chief until right before the end of Nintendo Power in 2012. So when we talk about decline, right, just to get a sense of where things were at this point, again, we stated at the top of the episode, none of us were reading Nintendo Power at this point. Like it just, we had moved on. A lot of people, unfortunately, had moved on. The news release that announced this sale also mentions that the original print run for the December 2007 issue was about 300,000. You may remember that that's half of the print run of the first issue of Nintendo Power in 1980.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
That is unfortunate.
it is that one hurts. That one hurts a lot. Now I will say though, Future's version of Nintendo Power I think is the best iteration of Nintendo Power. It is the cleanest. It is the most like quote unquote professional looking magazine. Because it was an engine, right? Like they were an actual publication house. This wasn't just a fun bunch of marketers that are just like, yeah, fuck it, we're a game counselor, right? Like this is now like a thing. This is what they do. So therefore, Nintendo Power post 2007, it looks just like any other gaming magazine that you'd find on store shelves. You got your reviews, you got your previews, you got your cover story, right? It's following the formula. In addition to the usual sales charts that you had been seeing at this point, Nintendo Power started including a most wanted list for the Wii Virtual Console because, again, like downloadable content was becoming a thing, and there was no way to track that demand in sales figures because a lot of that was just like downloadable stuff. And interestingly enough, Nintendo Power would really lean into this, especially in the later years during the DSiWare and WiiWare era, where they would really like promote a lot of these downloadable games that didn't get a lot of press, which I think is really cool. In 2008, right when Future started taking over, they also began releasing a retail version of covers with just like the lists of games titles, like the titles that they're going to cover, to kind of, again, to match the format of like Game Informer, EGM things. But then they would also release subscriber versions with all that text omitted. And this goes back to, again, we see a lot of the like subscriber versions versus the newsstand versions. This is the next iteration of that. Is subscribers get the clean cover art, but the retail versions get the like, now in this issue, da-da-da. They'd also done away with the late GameCube era Nintendo Powers when they updated the logo. They started doing this like kind of clunky sidebar, so they would do these like full color beautiful cover art images and then they cover up with like this weird sidebar that had like really small thumbnails of screenshots. So they did away with that because that didn't really work. But so now we're in late aughts, early 2010s. We fast forward to the Nintendo DS launch in 2010. We see a very consistent late 2000s, early 2010 version of Nintendo Power. Reader mail still in there, still going strong. This has been renamed the Pulse section, or Player Pulse rather. News had come and gone and had eventually been replaced with the section called Power Up, which, like, of course, sure. Most of the reviews and the features, that stuff would remain intact and would support the remainder of the Wii's life cycle. However, as they say, all good things and also print journalism must come to an end.
Andrew, the 3DS launched in 2010.
Oh my gosh.
Not the regular DS.
Yep.
Regular DS was much earlier.
Yes, thank you. 3DS. 3DS was in 2010? I thought it was in 2013.
No. 2010.
Wow.
I had to look. I was like 20.
Yeah,
I was playing my DS in high school. That
okay.
doesn't that
okay.
math doesn't
that
math
tracks.
out.
Fair enough. 3DS, thank you. So in August of 2012, Nintendo announced the end of Nintendo Power, and so issue 285, released in December 2012, was the final issue. That's right, y'all. It has been 10 years since Nintendo Power ended.
Wow. Oh, God. Oh, that hurts so bad.
And Kyle will cover it here in a bit. In a very, very cool homage to the first issue, Future recreated the iconic Super Mario Bros. 2 claymation cover art to promote a new game. Coincidentally, that was New Super Mario Bros. 2 for the 3DS.
It's pretty good. That's
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had 3DS in here, so there you go. Nintendo. So post Nintendo Power's death, Nintendo as a company, in their very, very on-brand method, have judiciously copyright-stricken any and all attempts to digitally archive old issues of Nintendo Power online. Kyle mentioned there are some stuff on archive. We will not link to that because I do not want to be the death. I don't want to cause the death of that. Because as recently as mid-November of this year, a Kotaku article came out. Literally, like, while Kyle and I were researching, this Kotaku article came out and was like, hey, real quick, we found a Reddit thread that showed that you can access any issue of Nintendo Power. By the time I clicked that link was
It
gone.
was dead.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So thank you, Kotaku, which is also an incredibly on-brand move from Kotaku.
Yeah. I do want to throw in and say real quick, the Video Game History Foundation is working on archiving all of Nintendo Power. And the last that I heard, awesome, which I don't keep up with the podcast super closely, but the last I heard, I think they had all of them, and we're working on scanning them and getting some variant covers and stuff.
I mean, look, I would pay a license to look at old Nintendo Powers, like, easily. Like, you can have my money for that.
You'd sign up for the Nintendo Battle Pass?
I would absolutely.
The Nintendo Power Battle Pass,
yes. Yeah, Nintendo Power Battle Pass. However, good news. Good news is that Nintendo Power does live on in different ways today. In December 2017, Nintendo of America began producing the Nintendo Power podcast, which is hosted by former Nintendo Power editor-in-chief Chris Slate.
Nice.
Have any of you listened to it?
It's me. I do.
Yeah.
I have listened to pretty much every episode since it came out. I really like it.
It's very much in the same style. Like, it is a Nintendo Power podcast. It's exactly what you expect from a Nintendo Power podcast. It's good. I listened to it a lot when it first came out. I haven't listened to it lately, but it's released mostly monthly, more or less monthly. It's very much clear that it's a passion project. It's something. The podcast, like I said, podcast is released more or less every month. When it came out, this was around the time that Reggie Fils-Aimé was leaving Nintendo and Doug Bowser was coming in as CEO. This was like late 17, early 18. So that was like a really good opportunity to get them on. They've also had a lot of the other Nintendo like figures, like Kit Ellis and Krista Yang, who for a long time were the face of Nintendo of America, like Treehouse and all of the PR stuff. Those two have also since left Nintendo and, of course, have their own podcast. But you can, you can find the Nintendo Power Podcast on any and all major podcast apps. But if print mags are still your thing, there is another answer. The spiritual successor of the Nintendo Power magazine lives on in the form of Nintendo Force. Have you guys seen this or heard of Nintendo Force?
No.
Okay.
No.
It's pretty cool. Nintendo Force is a completely independent. This is like a passion project, but it's led by a team of video game journos who all just like wanted to keep Nintendo Power alive. They do like, so you can subscribe to they have a Patreon. You can subscribe, and they do a print magazine every month. And it's like the whole thing. So it's like very much a spiritual successor. The magazine has like a ton of industry vets, including Nadia Oxford, who also happens to co-host one of my favorite podcasts, Acts of the Blood God.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I've got a link here if you want to check that out. That's NintendoForceMagazine.com or at their Patreon, patreon.com/NintendoForce. So really cool. Kyle, let's talk about some of the last issues of Nintendo Power.
Yeah, I'll write us out on some good final issues. The first one I have is issue 250. The link I have is not. This is the store cover. The subscription cover features Mario, and it's very much celebrating 250 issues of Nintendo Power. The whole thing is mostly like listicles. This is the era of the listicle. They do like our favorite heroes, which like surprise, surprise, Mario and Link are number 1 and 2. But they have some really weird like inclusions here.
Not like Bubsy. We didn't get Bubsy.
No Bubsy, but Leon Kennedy from Resident Evil 4.
He's a Nintendo hero.
The dog from Jet Force Gemini.
Travis Touchdown from No More Heroes is also included in this list of favorite heroes.
That were No More Heroes. They were really. That was like, hey, the Wii has mature games. We promise.
Yeah.
We promise, guys.
No More Heroes came out like this year, didn't it?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
What about Beautiful Joe? Was Beautiful Joe on that list?
Beautiful Joe is right before Leon Kennedy, actually, Todd. He's number 13 on the list. They also have like favorite villains. They do a breakdown of the various Nintendo controllers over the years. It's all listicles, baby. Popular mustaches from Nintendo gaming history. Popular ninjas from Nintendo gaming history.
Good.
More than half of which are the Ninja Turtles. So I hesitate to say not as quality content as I came to expect from Nintendo over the years, but also you should maybe not have half your list of ninjas be 4 of the most popular. Look,
I mean, it's 2009. It's a magazine. You're just trying to get through the day, man.
you're pushing ads. Yeah, I get it. The other one I wanted to talk about was the second to last issue 284. And this is the only reason I wanted to bring this up is like Nintendo Power has a long history of covering games popular and like hidden gems, or like popular and less popular. And this one is notable because on its second last issue, Nintendo Power featured Shantae, what is it?
Pirate.
Prince of Pirates, or
Shantae
Crown
the
of
Pirate's
Pirates. Shantae the Pirate's Curse. Thank you. I had it written down.
It was a good game.
I
love
lost
that
it.
game. It was really good.
Which like Shantae is not it got a cult following, but it is not a popular franchise by any stretch of the word, and it's featured on their second last cover, which I thought was very cool and like very true to Nintendo Power form. And then finally we have our the final issue 285. We've got the claymated homage to the first cover including Bowser in place of Wart. Mario is jumping on Goombas instead of I think out of a pipe like in the first one. I could scroll up and
That's
verify
just a
that.
mushroom.
It's just a mushroom.
mushroom.
But it's even got like the star where on the first issue it said free promotional. It says poster inside on the star in the same place. It's a very good like recreation of that first issue cover art, promoting New Super Mario Bros. U, which is just a very good tie back to the original. And those were the
source for Nintendo players, straight from the pros.
Straight from the pros.
Yeah.
And that's where I wanted to bring us out. Just those three. I didn't read much during that time, so if there's like notable issues from that time that you're mad I didn't include, sorry.
At him personally.
Yeah, at me at T2 on Twitter.
Stop
Right. I remember when we used to do that. I'm just trying to figure out. I did the conflation calculator to the price of Nintendo Power, and the price of Nintendo Power actually went down over time.
Wow.
And its initial cost was $3.95 in August of 1988. Would have been the same as $7.62 in December of 2012, and the December 2012 issue cost $5.95. So, much like video games, the price of video game content went down over time, which is fun.
Same with the quality.
Same with the quality. Also, it was mostly ads at this point, so that's
Right,
also
right.
probably
Yeah.
why. So that's all we've got. Final thoughts, closing thoughts on Nintendo Power.
I had one other thing real quick. I mentioned the Video Game History Foundation earlier. They have a podcast called the Video Game History Hour, which I really, really enjoy. And back in March, they released an episode. It was episode 75, the Nintendo Power Reunion, which is actually a recording of a ticketed panel event fundraiser that they did. And I knew a lot of this stuff from this flavor text coming in because I listened to this months ago. It's basically just a round table with Gail Tilden, Howard Phillips, Leslie Swan, and Jeff Bafis, who I don't know if we talked about today. He's the former sales and marketing manager at Nintendo of America.
Well,
and he
I'm
was a
glad
writer
I'm
and
glad I got
editor for
3 of those
Nintendo
4
Power.
people at least. That's good.
Yeah, there you go. So it's 2.5 hours of people telling stories from when marketing budgets were much different than they are today. So it's
awesome.
really cool. It's worth the listen. It's episode 75 of the Video Game History Hour, also available wherever you're listening to this, probably.
I think that when I look back on the approximate, 7 years that I subscribed to Nintendo Power, that throughout those 7 years, that Nintendo Power is probably the biggest influence of games that I tried. Mm-hmm. Like, it was, I think there were probably 3 influences, maybe 4 if you count, like, friends that also had games, but, like, friends that had games, Nintendo Power, commercials, and then whatever was for rent at the video, like, the rental video store uptown. And, I can think of so many core video game memories and building blocks that I would not have had I not read about them in Nintendo Power. Like, specifically Earthbound. Like, I would have never played Earthbound had I not read about it in Nintendo Power and saw, like, the weird art with Master Belch, like the little goopy guy. And I was like, all right, this is rad. I'm in. Like, I think I probably wouldn't have played Phantasy Star Online had I not, like, seen an ad or something in Nintendo Power. So, and that was a defining game of my early high school / late high school GameCube era.
I will say, like Todd, yes, Nintendo Power is probably like the most significant like contributor to what games I bought during the era I was subscribed. I got Beautiful Joe because of Nintendo Power, and I played 2 hours of it. Like, it was a very effective marketing campaign to 12-year-old Kyle. I will also say I leafed through a number of issues, at least 30 issues in preparation for this. Some of it I read, some of it I leafed through very quickly. And especially in the early era, up until like the change around the GameCube time, there was a real passion and like fun, and like you could just tell the people making this really enjoyed making this content and putting it out there for us. It really comes through in the writing, in a way that like only very recently I see again in video game journalism. Like video game journalism is once again about like what playing the game like feels like, and not just like how cool games, like how cool technology has come and like what advances it's making. It's once again back to like playing games makes me feel this, and it's very very cool to see that come back around, because like that's why we're all here today. So
I was going to add one more thing. I forgot to add this when we were talking about the letters to the editor, that I vividly remember a story of a kid who lived in some like snowy state. I don't know if it was as far up as Alaska or if just like snowy state land. Anyway, not the point. That the kid was talking about how he had been cleaning his room and put his rumble pack on the windowsill, and it fell out and he couldn't find it, and then it snowed. And like it spent the whole winter outside, and it still worked in the spring.
Hell yeah, dude.
There were all kinds of like console survivor stories. I remember one, a veteran of the like Iraq War, the first wave of it, showed his like sent Nintendo Power a picture of his Game Boy that like survived an IUD blast and like was still playable after that, which is very cool.
I think it's IED.
But IED. That's what I said. Whatever.
Oh wow, I didn't even think of that. That's really funny.
Very good.
And then the other thing, I forgot to mention it earlier. Another cool thing early Nintendo Power did especially was like it included a high scores list that was entirely self-reported.
Yeah.
So you just have like so and so from Columbus, Ohio, hit a score of 100,000.
69,420.
Yeah, like it's nothing.
Like it was nothing, but it was there in every of those early issues, just like some high scores lists and achievement, like early achievements too, from games. It was very cool. I very much recommend going and like Google searching for some of these issues, because they're not hard to find. We won't link to them so they don't get copyright struck, but like archive.com has a lot of them. Leaf through one you remember, if you remember any, because it will unlock a flood of memories you forgot about.
Totally. I'll say too, the Nintendo.fandom.com has a lot of good information, and it's all just thumbnail images, so you're safe. I'll just say, just to close this out here, my memory of Nintendo Power is absolutely tied to an issue that I had that detailed out, that was a big, like, huge feature preview of Super Mario RPG. That magazine got so beat up because it just lived in the bathroom, and it was just like it's just like just pages and pages that had been wet and dried just from like hand washing and stuff.
It's its own ecosystem.
Yeah, because like it just lived by the toilet.
Where all magazines live.
Where all magazines live. I mean, who's reading a magazine on the couch like a pervert? You're reading it you're reading it while pooping. All right, get over yourselves. Anyway, thanks for listening to Debate This. You can follow along with the arguments on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Debate This Cast, or on our website at debatethiscast.com. Once again, a special thanks goes out to @BaconBitBehemoth on the Discord for commissioning today's episode. Once again, beginning in January, you'll be able to commission your own episode of Flavor Text by visiting patreon.com/debatethiscast and subscribing to the Master Debater level. No longer will you have to subscribe for 3 months. Nay. Only all this requires is a one-time payment of $60. That will immediately grant you flavor text commissioning powers for an upcoming episode. Until next time, we are Andrew Henderson.
And Kyle Harper.
And I am Matt, a 90s marketing budget worth of cocaine coal.
And I am Todd. You can buy the Debate This Ocarina at songbirdocarina.com/debate this. Thomas.
And we're saying thanks for debating with us. And if you think we're wrong, you can come fight us behind the swing sets, nerds.
Todd, I'm going to give you a clean cut of cocaine budget because I choked when I said cocaine, so you can prop that in if you
Throw a
want to.
couple more in there.
Cocaine budget. Cocaine budget. Cocaine budget. There you go.
Wonderful.
Matt, were you paid by Cocaine
Big
Bear?
cocaine.
My big cocaine budget. Yeah.